They laughed at him. They photographed him. They called him a failure. A man in worn-out clothes, milk soaking through his shirt, quietly soothing his 4-year-old daughter in a crowded Chicago cafe. Nobody in that room could have known that the hands wiping down a little girl's face had once dismantled a 12-man ambush in a nameless desert, in total darkness, without firing a single shot. They saw a broke, beaten-down father who couldn't afford dry cleaning. They had no idea what was about to walk through that door, and they had absolutely no idea what was already sitting in the room. If this story finds you, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this goes. Hit that like button and stay until the end. Trust me, you'll want to see how this one lands. The morning had already gone sideways before Jace Holloway even got his coffee. Lily had woken up at 5:43, which meant Jace had woken up at 5:43, which meant the 45 minutes he'd planned for himself. The quiet, the stillness, the cup of black coffee on the fire escape that had become the one small ritual keeping him sane, evaporated before it ever existed. She'd had a nightmare. She couldn't describe it, not really, the way 4-year-olds can't describe anything except in the broadest emotional terms. But she'd stood in his doorway with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, and her lower lip doing that particular tremble that made Jace feel like his ribcage was collapsing inward. "Daddy, something was chasing me." He'd pulled her into bed without a word. She'd fallen back asleep in 11 minutes. He'd stared at the ceiling for 2 hours. By the time they made it out of the apartment, they were running late for her Friday morning story time at the Elm Street Library. Lily had changed her outfit 3 times, the final choice being a purple tutu over corduroy pants, which Jace had zero opinion about. And he'd managed to spill half a travel mug of coffee on the kitchen floor, which meant he cleaned it up, which meant he was now walking into the cold Chicago morning with no caffeine and a 4-year-old who had somehow acquired more energy than a small engine. "Can we get hot chocolate?" Lily asked, pulling on his hand. "Library first." "Hot chocolate after?" He looked down at her. She looked up at him with those dark brown eyes, her mother's eyes, completely and totally her mother's eyes. And he felt that familiar thing he could never quite name. Not quite grief, not quite love. Something that existed in the space between them. "Hot chocolate after," he said. She grinned and pulled him forward like she was trying to relocate the entire sidewalk. The Wicker Park Public Library story time ran from 9 to 9:40, and Lily sat cross-legged in the front row with the kind of focused intensity that Jace found both funny and slightly unnerving in a child her age. She listened to the librarian, a soft-spoken woman named Mrs. Okafor, who had the patience of a person who had clearly chosen her profession on purpose. With her rabbit on her lap, and her back straight, and her whole face arranged in the expression of someone absorbing critical intelligence. She got that from him, he knew, the stillness, the way of watching things. He wished she'd gotten it from someone else. After story time, they walked 3 blocks south to a place called Grounded, a cafe Jace had been coming to for about 8 months, partly because the coffee was genuinely good, and partly because the corner booth near the back window gave him a clear sightline to both the front entrance and the emergency exit, which he'd stopped feeling embarrassed about somewhere around his second tour. Old habits. The place was busy for a Friday morning, and not the kind of busy Jace preferred. There was a table of 6 near the center of the room. Suits, watches that cost more than his car, the particular brand of loud that comes with people who have never once had to worry about being heard. A women's networking brunch by the look of it. Maybe a corporate team, some post-meeting celebration. Their laughter had a sharp quality to it, the kind that wasn't always about being happy. He found his corner booth. Lily climbed in across from him and immediately began rearranging the sugar packets into a pattern only she understood. "The bunny wants a name," Lily announced, holding up her rabbit. "The bunny has a name, Mr. Ears." "Mr. Ears is a boring name, Daddy. You named him." She considered this with the gravity of a small philosopher. "I was 3. I didn't know better." Jace almost smiled. He caught it just before it fully formed, the way he caught most things, reflexively, quietly. The waitress came, a young woman with a nose ring and the slightly dazed expression of someone 3 hours into a 6-hour shift. Lily ordered hot chocolate with extra marshmallows, enunciating each word with great care, and Jace ordered black coffee and an egg sandwich, and for a few minutes the morning existed in a register that felt almost ordinary. Almost. He noticed her the way he noticed everything, without looking directly, without any visible shift in posture. The woman sitting 2 tables over, alone, laptop open, a large manila folder and 3 separate phones arranged on the table beside her cup. Somewhere around 30, maybe a year or 2 either side. Dark blazer, hair back, the exact posture of someone who had taught themselves to work in public without actually being in public. She'd been there when they arrived. She hadn't looked up once, but she wasn't reading. Her eyes moved too fast for reading. She was thinking, processing something. Jace filed it away and stopped looking. The hot chocolate arrived. Lily received it with both hands in the solemnity of someone accepting something sacred, and Jace let himself exist in that particular small moment. The steam rising, his daughter's expression of concentrated joy, the noise of the city outside. And for those 20 seconds, the weight he carried everywhere shifted, just slightly. Then Lily reached for the mug with a bit too much enthusiasm. Her elbow caught the edge of his coffee, and the cup went sideways. It hit him square in the chest, not boiling, warm, but not scalding. But it soaked through his shirt in about 3 seconds flat and turned the gray cotton into something dark and clingy and wet. "Daddy, I'm sorry. It's okay," he said immediately, because it was. "It's just a shirt. You okay? Did any hit you?" "No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Lily, look at me." He kept his voice even, calm, the same tone he used whether he was reading her a bedtime story or telling her to stay behind him. She looked up. "It's a shirt. I have other shirts. You're fine. I'm fine. The hot chocolate is fine, okay?" She nodded, still looking guilty. "Drink your hot chocolate before it gets cold." She picked up the mug carefully, with both hands this time. He grabbed a few napkins from the dispenser and started pressing them against his chest, which accomplished essentially nothing except redistributing the wetness. The shirt was done. He'd change when they got home. It wasn't a problem. From the center table, though, it had become something else. He heard the laughter before he identified the source. Sharp, bright, pointed. The kind that requires an audience. He glanced up because he couldn't help it, because some part of his brain still cataloged threats even when threats were social rather than tactical. One of the men at the center table, 30s, heavy watch, the kind of open-collared shirt that probably cost $300, had his phone out, pointed in Jace's direction. He was saying something to the woman beside him, something Jace couldn't fully hear through the ambient noise, but he caught the shape of it. "Look at this guy." The woman laughed. Another one looked over. Someone made a comment about not being able to afford a washing machine. Another voice, female, not quiet about it, said something about how some people probably should have thought harder before having kids they couldn't take care of. Lily, who was 4 and not yet fluent in adult cruelty, kept drinking her hot chocolate, focused on the marshmallows. Jace looked down at his wet shirt. Then he looked up at the table. Then he looked back down. He pressed the napkin against his chest and said nothing. This was not the hardest thing he had ever done. Not even close. There had been a night in a city whose name wasn't on the mission brief when he'd been in a drainage culvert for 9 hours with 2 teammates and a compromised radio and orders that had stopped making sense 3 hours into execution. He'd held it together then. He could hold it together now, in a cafe, with people laughing at a coffee stain, but his jaw was tight. He could feel it. "Daddy, why are those people laughing?" He looked at Lily. Her eyes were tracking toward the center table with that clear, unfiltered assessment that children do before they learn to look away. "They're just having a good morning," he said. She looked at him with an expression that suggested she was not entirely convinced, but was willing to let it go, which, he thought, made her more mature than at least 2 of the adults across the room. He folded the wet napkin and set it on the edge of the table. He picked up his coffee, the remaining half of it, and took a drink and looked out the window. The street was ordinary, a delivery truck double-parked, a woman walking a dog that seemed to have strong opinions about a particular patch of sidewalk, 2 kids in school uniforms arguing about something, the city doing what it did, indifferent and continuous. He almost missed what he saw next because he was watching the kids. Almost. The armored van came from the north, which was wrong. Not wrong in an obvious way. Armored vehicles weren't uncommon in the city, Bank transports ran these streets daily. But this one was moving differently. Slower than it should have been, but not the careful slow of a vehicle checking an address. The deliberate slow of a vehicle in position. It rolled to a stop directly in front of Grounded and sat there. No markings on the side. Jace set down his cup. "Hey, Lily Bug!" His voice came out completely level. He had a gift for that. Some people thought it was coldness. His late wife Maya had once called it the scariest thing about him, not because it was frightening, but because it was so total. "I need you to do something for me." She looked up from her marshmallows. "What?" "Slide out of the booth and go sit right here." He patted the inner wall beside the booth, a recessed alcove beside a coat rack that wasn't ideal, but was better than open sightlines to the windows. "Right there, with your rabbit. Can you do that for me?" She read something in his face that 4-year-olds sometimes read and adults miss. She didn't argue. She slid out of the booth with her rabbit and moved to where he'd pointed. "Stay low. Stay quiet." He looked at her steadily. "This is like the fire drill game. Remember the fire drill game?" She nodded. He'd invented the fire drill game when she was 2, casual and playful. If Daddy says the fire drill word, we find a safe corner and we wait and we stay quiet until Daddy comes. She thought it was a game. He'd never stopped hoping it stayed that way. "What's the word?" she said. "Salamander," he said. He'd been cycling through animal names for a year. He'd used up everything from armadillo to walrus. Salamander means, "Stay quiet and wait for you," she said. "I know, Daddy." "Good girl." He turned back to the room. The van doors opened. There were 4 of them, maybe 5. He clocked a potential position behind the driver's seat, but didn't have full confirmation. They came through the front door in a stack, which meant training, which meant this wasn't opportunistic. They wore plain tactical gear, not uniforms, faces covered. 2 long guns immediately up and sweeping. 1 man moving toward the counter with a bag. 1 man taking a position by the door. The whole room seemed to stall for a second, that half-beat where human brains struggle to recalibrate from safety to danger. And then someone screamed and the spell broke, and the cafe became noise and movement and falling chairs. Nobody moves, on the ground, now. The man from the center table, heavy watch, $300 shirt, was out of his chair and trying to back toward the kitchen, and the gunman by the door moved to cut him off with an efficiency that confirmed again that these were not amateurs. Jace was already moving, not toward the gunman, not yet. He moved first to a position that put a structural column between himself and the primary sightline from the entrance, and from there he did what he'd been trained to do in the first 8 seconds of any developing situation. He assessed. 5 confirmed. 1 on the door, 1 on the counter with the bag. Robbery maybe, or a grab, couldn't tell yet. 2 doing crowd control in the center of the room, shouting people down to the floor. The 5th, he was now sure, still in or near the vehicle. Driver, probably, or a backup. The weapons were real. The body language was professional. The movement pattern was coordinated, which meant communication. Earpieces, probably. They weren't here for the register. He figured that out in the first 12 seconds because of what they were doing, and more importantly, what they weren't doing. A crew hitting a cafe for cash moves fast and loud and gets out in under 2 minutes. This team was positioning, controlling the room, creating a scenario. They were here for someone specific. He'd worked enough extractions and enough abductions to recognize the shape of a targeted op. His eyes moved to the woman with the laptops. She hadn't screamed, she hadn't scrambled. She was on the floor with her hands visible, which was the right instinct, but her face, he could see her face from his angle, was not the face of someone in random danger. There was recognition in it, not surprise. Recognition. She knew this was coming, or she knew why it was coming. One of the crowd control gunmen was moving toward her now, more purposeful than his scanning pattern warranted, not checking the room, checking for her, target acquisition. Jace's body made the decision before his brain fully signed off on it, which was how it had always worked, the long muscles of training overriding the slower circuitry of conscious thought. He came around the column low and fast. The first man didn't see him until Jace was already inside his arm radius, and by then the geometry of the situation had fundamentally changed in ways the gunman's training hadn't accounted for. Jace controlled the weapon first, always the weapon first, redirecting the muzzle before anything else. A sharp rotational move that took the long gun off the threat axis while simultaneously turning the man's own momentum against him. The takedown was fast and not clean. Nothing real ever was. And the gunman went down hard against a table, scattering cups and plates, and the noise of it cut through the room. What the... The second crowd control man was already turning. He was good. His reaction time was better than most. It didn't matter, because Jace had already read the turn and was moving to his blind side. And the exchange that followed lasted maybe 4 seconds and involved a chair, the man's own elbow, and a controlled strike to a nerve cluster behind the jaw that Jace had learned from a South Korean instructor in a basement in Coronado, who had explained it with the calm of someone describing how to fold laundry. 2 down. Neither dead. He'd been specific about that. The man at the counter spun and raised his weapon. "Don't," Jace said. 1 word. He'd learned that about himself a long time ago, that the voice worked when the body was already in motion. The gunman hesitated, which was all Jace needed to cover the distance, and the next 6 seconds were not something he'd describe to anyone who wasn't trained to understand them. The gunman by the door was the problem. He'd moved when the first engagement started, back toward the entrance, creating distance, which was tactically smart. And now he had a line on Jace across the length of the room, and his weapon was up, and he wasn't hesitating. Jace threw himself left behind a table he'd already mentally flagged as substantial enough to provide minimal cover, and the shot that came hit the wood and sent splinters across his forearm. And he felt the sting but filed it under, deal with it later. And he was coming back up from the low position when he saw the gunman by the door suddenly lose his footing. He'd been tripped. The woman with the laptops had moved from her floor position and hooked the gunman's ankle from behind a toppled chair, and the move was deliberate, not panicked, not accidental. And when the gunman went down, she was already scrambling away from him. Not trained, but not passive. She'd waited for the right moment, and she'd used it. Jace covered the distance to the downed gunman in 3 steps. The situation resolved quickly after that. He stood in the middle of grounded coffee, breathing hard, and looked at what the room had become. Overturned chairs, broken cups, 5 incapacitated men in tactical gear, a group of civilians on the floor in various states of shock. The man with the expensive watch was pressed against the far wall with his eyes showing white at the edges. Jace's chest still had coffee on it. "Salamander's over," he called toward the alcove by the coat rack, keeping his voice level. "You can come out." A small head appeared around the corner, wide-eyed, rabbit-clutched, white-knuckled to her chest. "Daddy," Lily said, "you knocked over a lot of stuff." "Yeah," he said, "I did." He crossed the room and crouched down in front of her, checking her over, eyes, face, hands, in the quick, systematic way that she was old enough to recognize and tolerate. She let him do it. "You okay?" "My hot chocolate fell over," she said mournfully. "I know. I'll get you another one. There's glass on the floor." "I see it. Can you stay right here 1 more minute?" She looked at the room. She looked at him. She looked back at the room. "Daddy?" she said, in the particular tone that meant she was working something out. "Are those men sleeping?" "They're resting," he said. She appeared to accept this. They should have picked a better place to rest. He almost smiled again. This time he let it happen, small and brief, before he stood back up to deal with the rest of it. The woman was standing a few feet away. Her blazer was torn at the shoulder from the floor. Her laptop was probably destroyed. It had taken a hard fall from the table. She was looking at him with an expression he recognized, even though most people he'd met only showed it once. The expression of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about a situation. "That was my company's security team that was supposed to be outside," she said. Her voice was steady. Steadier than it had any right to be. Which means someone told them not to be. "I know," Jace said. She looked at him. Really looked at him, the way she'd apparently been doing since they arrived, he realized. "Who are you?" He looked down at his wet, coffee-stained shirt, then at the 5 men on the floor, then at the chalk-faced socialites against the wall, then back at her. "Jace Holloway," he said. "And what do you do, Jace Holloway?" From across the room, one of the men at the center table, still pressed against the wall, still pale, still wearing his $300 shirt, said in a voice barely above a breath, "What is he?" Jace picked up his daughter. Get your rabbit, he told her. I have my rabbit. He looked at the woman with the torn blazer. You should call someone. The fifth man is still in the van. Her eyes went to the window. The van was still there. She was already reaching for one of her phones. Outside, the first police siren was just beginning to rise over the sound of the city. Jace stood in the middle of the wreckage of an ordinary Friday morning. A cafe upended, civilians on the floor, 5 trained operatives down. His daughter's arm around his neck, and her rabbit pressed between them. And he felt the familiar slow return of the thing he'd spent 3 years trying to leave behind. Not adrenaline, not fear. Something quieter and older and more fundamental than either of those. The particular alert state of a man who had spent years in the dark, understanding that the danger you see is almost never the whole danger. Someone had sent 5 trained men into a civilian coffee shop in broad daylight. Someone had neutralized whatever security was supposed to be outside. Someone had a target. He looked at the woman with the torn blazer and the 3 phones and the expression of a person who was already thinking 3 moves ahead. And he understood, even then, even standing in a puddle of coffee with his daughter's hot chocolate all over the floor, that whatever this was, it was not over. It was barely beginning. Outside, the siren grew louder. Inside, the man they had mocked finished wiping milk off his sleeve, and nobody was laughing anymore. The police arrived in 4 cars, which was 2 more than the situation technically required, and 2 fewer than Jace would have preferred if he were the one coordinating the response. They came in loud. Sirens, doors, the particular organized chaos of officers entering an unknown scene, and for about 90 seconds the cafe existed in a state of controlled pandemonium while badges were shown and weapons were holstered, and everyone with a voice tried to talk at the same time. Jace sat in the corner booth with Lily on his lap and said nothing. He'd zip-tied the 5 men using restraints he'd found in the tactical vest of the one closest to him, which told him something because civilian robbery crews didn't carry zip restraints. And he'd disarmed all of them and stacked the weapons behind the counter, where a barista named Trevor was still sitting on the floor with his back against the espresso machine, looking at nothing in particular. "You doing okay?" Jace had asked him before the police arrived. Trevor had looked up. He was maybe 22. His hands were shaking. "I just make coffee," he said, as if this were relevant information that might excuse him from having witnessed the last 15 minutes. "I know," Jace said. "You did fine." It wasn't much, but Trevor had nodded and seemed to find something in it. Now, with the police inside and the scene shifting from emergency to aftermath, Lily was drawing on the back of a receipt she'd found on the table. She was drawing what appeared to be a rabbit driving a truck. Jace watched her for a moment and felt something complicated move through him. The particular mix of relief and exhaustion and something he couldn't fully name that came every time a dangerous situation ended with her still okay. Still here, still drawing trucks. "Sir." A detective materialized beside the booth, 40s, tired eyes, a sport coat that had seen better decades. He had the look of someone who'd been doing this long enough that very little surprised him, but today was testing that. "Detective Ray Kowalski, I need to ask you a few questions." "Sure," Jace said. Kowalski looked at the 5 men in zip ties. He looked at the overturned furniture. He looked at Jace, who was still wearing a coffee-stained shirt and holding a 4-year-old in his lap. "You did this," Kowalski said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Alone." "Yes." Kowalski wrote something in his notebook, or pretended to. Jace couldn't tell. "The witnesses are saying it happened fast." "It did." "How fast?" Jace looked at him. "Fast enough." The detective studied him for a moment, then seemed to make a decision about how hard to push, and settled on not very hard. "You have ID?" Jace handed over his Illinois driver's license. Kowalski looked at it, looked at him, wrote something down. "Any military background, Mr. Holloway?" Some, Kowalski repeated in the tone of a man who had heard that particular word used as a shield before and recognized it immediately. "Right. We're going to need you to come in and give a full statement. You're not under arrest, but—" "I know the difference," Jace said. Kowalski looked at him again, then at Lily, who had looked up from her drawing long enough to assess the detective with the frank scrutiny of a child who had not yet learned that staring was impolite. "Is she yours?" he asked. Yes. Is there someone who can... She stays with me, Jace said, quietly. Not aggressive, just a fact. Kowalski wrote something else down and moved away without pushing it. Across the room, Evelyn Sinclair was talking to two uniformed officers in the way that people with legal departments talk to police. Controlled, precise, giving exactly the information requested and nothing beyond it. She'd identified herself, Jace had gathered from the fragments he could hear, as the CEO of Sinclair Logistics, a company that apparently most people in the room recognized based on the shift in the officer's posture when she said it. He watched her without watching her. The way she moved, the way she managed the conversation, the way she kept her eyes tracking the room even while answering questions. She'd had training, not combat training, nothing close to what he'd been through, but situational awareness, executive protection seminars, maybe. Someone had taught her not to put her back to an open space. She wasn't going to tell the police everything. That much was clear. He didn't blame her. It took 2 hours before the scene released them. Jace gave his statement to Kowalski in a booth near the back while Lily colored on the back of a paper menu that a shell-shocked waitress had brought her, and he told the detective what happened in the order that it happened in the version that was true without being complete. He'd seen a threat. He'd responded. He had the training to do so. He hadn't intended to get involved, but when people around his daughter were in danger, the calculus was simple. Kowalski listened without interrupting. When Jace finished, the detective tapped his pen against his notebook twice. "These guys aren't local," Kowalski said. "IDs are clean, but too clean. We're already flagging them to federal." "Okay," Jace said, "which means whatever this was, it's probably going to get complicated." "Probably," Jace agreed. "You know anything about why someone would send a crew like this into a coffee shop on a Friday morning?" Jace looked at him steadily. "No." He wasn't lying exactly. He had a theory, but a theory wasn't knowledge, and until he had something harder than a theory, there was no value in sharing it with a Chicago detective who was already in over his head on this one. Kowalski seemed to sense the boundary and accepted it, the way tired detectives sometimes do when they recognize they're talking to someone who operates in a world they only partially understand. He gave Jace a card. Jace pocketed it. They were releasing people through the front in small groups. Jace lifted Lily onto his hip and started toward the exit, and that's when Evelyn Sinclair appeared at his elbow. She didn't make a production of it. She simply fell into step beside him, which was either confidence or something else. "I'd like to talk to you," she said, keeping her voice low. "Not here." "I know," Jace said. She glanced at him sideways. "You know, you've been watching me since we got here, before any of this happened." He shifted Lily slightly on his hip. "I noticed." A short pause. "And you didn't find that concerning?" "No, you were watching everyone. You're careful." He looked straight ahead. "But you were watching me specifically after the first 10 minutes, which means you saw something." She was quiet for a moment. Outside, the gray Chicago morning had turned into a gray Chicago midday, the kind of flat, cold light that made the city look like a photograph of itself. "There's a car," she said. "If you're willing." He looked at Lily. She had her head on his shoulder, starting to fade. The excitement and the interrupted morning schedule were catching up to her. She'd be asleep in 20 minutes if he let her. "I need to take her home first," he said. "She needs lunch and a nap." Evelyn looked at him, and he could see her recalibrating, adjusting whatever expectations she'd carried out of the cafe. "Of course," she said. "I'll have someone follow at a distance and wait." "Tell them to stay on the east side of the block," Jace said. "I'll know if they're closer than that." She looked at him again, that same reassessing look. "All right," she said. He didn't say anything else. He walked to the corner, turned south, and started toward home. He made grilled cheese and tomato soup from a can, because that was what Lily wanted, and also because it was what they had, and he sat across from her at their small kitchen table while she ate, and told him, in great and somewhat incoherent detail, about a girl in her storytime group named Priya who had a backpack shaped like a frog. "She let me hold it," Lily said. "That was nice of her." "It had a zipper on the tongue, the frog's tongue," she demonstrated with her hands. "Zip, like that. Sounds like a good backpack. I want one. I know. Can I have one?" "Maybe for your birthday." She considered this. "My birthday is very far away." 6 months, he said. That's basically forever. He topped off her soup. She ate. Outside, the city continued doing whatever the city did, and in his peripheral awareness, he tracked the black sedan parked on the east side of the block, exactly where he'd specified, without turning to look at it. After lunch, he put Lily down for her nap. She went without argument, which was unusual enough that he stood in her doorway for an extra moment. She was already half asleep, rabbit tucked under her arm, the corduroy and purple tutu combination somehow surviving the entire morning intact. "Daddy?" she said, without opening her eyes. "Yeah." "Those men in the cafe, were they bad guys?" He was quiet for a second. She was 4 and he'd spent a long time trying to figure out how to talk to a 4-year-old about certain things. He hadn't figured it out yet. "Some people make bad choices," he said. She seemed to turn this over. "You stopped them." "Yeah." "Is that your job?" "Not anymore," he said. She was asleep before he finished the sentence. He stood in the doorway a moment longer than he needed to. Then he went to his bedroom, changed his shirt, finally, and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror for a few seconds. He had a cut on his left forearm from the splinters when the shot hit the table. He hadn't noticed it doing its full damage until now. He cleaned it, taped it, and moved on. The building's super, an older man named Frank, who had been maintaining this particular set of 12 units for roughly 30 years, and who watched Lily on short notice without ever making Jace feel like he owed him anything, agreed to sit on the couch and listen for her without Jace having to explain much. Frank was good at not requiring explanations. "Couple hours," Jace said. "Sure," Frank said. "She already sleeping?" "Just went down." "I'll be here." Frank settled into the armchair with the newspaper he always carried folded in his back pocket. "You look like you had a morning." "Little bit," Jace said. "You want to tell me about it?" "Not particularly." Frank nodded, unfolded his newspaper, and that was the end of that. The black sedan was a Mercedes, clean and dark, and the driver didn't try to make conversation, which Jace appreciated. The back seat smelled like leather and something faint and expensive. Evelyn was already inside, her laptop open, one of the phones to her ear. She held up a single finger when he got in, 1 minute, and finished a conversation that consisted almost entirely of her saying things like "no" and "I'm aware" and "tell legal to wait for me to call them" before ending it and closing the laptop with the particular click of someone shutting a door. She looked at him. "Your daughter?" she asked. "With someone I trust," he said. Which was true. Frank had known Lily since she was 11 months old. There were maybe 3 people on the planet Jace trusted in any meaningful sense, and Frank was one of them. "Okay," she said, "then I want to be direct with you because I think you'll respond better to that than to any other approach." "Go ahead," he said. She studied him for a moment. There was something in her look that wasn't quite warmth, more like the careful attention of someone who was deciding how much to reveal to a person they'd decided was worth revealing it to. "My name is Evelyn Sinclair. I run a company called Sinclair Logistics. We move about $19 billion in freight annually across 42 countries." She said it matter-of-factly, the way you'd describe a job you'd had long enough that the numbers didn't impress you anymore. "Someone has been trying to take it from me, not through a buyout, not through the market, through a coordinated effort to destroy it, its assets, its operations, and if this morning is any indication, its leadership." "You," Jace said. "Me," she confirmed. "How long?" The pattern became clear about 4 months ago, but looking back, I think the groundwork started closer to 8. She opened a folder from the seat beside her. Physical documents, not digital, which again told him something about her. People who used paper in her position had thought about the ways digital could be compromised. 3 incidents before today. A warehouse fire in Memphis that we initially attributed to electrical fault. A shipping data breach in Rotterdam that cost us a major contract. And a personal threat. Credible enough that I had a security team in place as of 6 weeks ago. "The team that wasn't outside the cafe this morning," Jace said. Her jaw tightened, barely. "Yes. Someone pulled them. Or they were bought." She said it evenly, but he could hear the thing underneath it. Not just anger, but the particular pain of betrayal, the kind that comes from realizing the threat is inside the walls. Jace looked out the window. They were moving north through the city, going nowhere specific, just moving. A privacy measure, probably, though it wouldn't do much against a sophisticated surveillance operation. You think it's internal? I think it has to be, partially. The operational security on our schedules is tight. No one should have known I'd be at that cafe this morning except my assistant and one board member. So it's one of them, he said, or someone they talked to without realizing what they were saying. She paused. I don't know yet. That's the part I don't know. Jace turned back to her. Why are you telling me this? She met his eyes. Because I ran your name the moment you told it to me. I made 2 calls while I was still talking to the police. I have resources, and when I use them, I get information quickly. She set the folder on her lap. Jace Holloway, former Navy SEAL Team 6, separated from service 3 years ago. Decorated multiple times for things that aren't listed anywhere accessible, which means the accessible records are just the polite version. She held his gaze. Your wife's name was Maya. She died of a brain aneurysm 18 months after you left the military. Your daughter's name is Lily. You've been raising her alone in Wicker Park. You do occasional security consulting under a shell arrangement that takes you away for no more than 72 hours at a time, so you're never far from her. The car was quiet. That's accurate, he said. His voice gave nothing. I know it is, she said. I'm not telling you to show off. I'm telling you because I don't want to waste your time with a pitch that pretends I don't know who you're dealing with. You're not the kind of person who responds well to being managed. She leaned forward slightly. And I need the real thing, not a security firm, not a corporate protection service. I need someone who can do what you did this morning, but planned instead of improvised. What you're describing is a long engagement, he said. Operational, not just protection. Yes. That means extended hours, variable schedules, unpredictable conditions. I have a 4-year-old daughter. I know, she said. I'm prepared to structure the arrangement around that. He looked at her. People say things like that. I imagine they do, and then they don't follow through, and that becomes a problem. She didn't look away. I'm not asking you to choose between the job and your daughter. I'm asking you to find a way to do both, and telling you that I'll put real resources behind making that possible. Not as a favor, as a condition of the arrangement. The car moved through an intersection. A bus pulled up beside them and blocked the light for a moment, and in the strange dimness of it, Jace looked at this woman, who had stayed on the floor with her hands visible while 5 trained men took control of a room, who had tripped a gunman at exactly the right moment with no training and nothing but nerve, who had already done a background investigation on him before the police were done taking statements, who was sitting across from him in the back of a moving car and telling him the truth. Not all of it. Nobody ever told all of it, but enough of it. You said the threat is partially internal, he said. Yes. Which means whoever I'm protecting you from may have access to information about protective measures as soon as those measures are in place. That's the problem I haven't solved yet. It changes the architecture significantly, he said. If someone inside knows your security setup, standard protocol is completely useless. Everything has to be compartmentalized. They can't know what I know, and in some cases you can't know what I know. She was quiet for a moment. That's a significant amount of trust to ask for. Yes, he said. It is. I'd be asking the same thing of you. She absorbed this. He watched her think. Not the performance of thinking, but the actual thing, the slight stillness of someone processing a real problem in real time. How quickly could you start? She said. Depends on what start means. Evaluation first. I want you to walk through my operation, offices, properties, logistics, personnel, and tell me what you see. I'd need access to things your current people don't know I'm looking at. Agreed. And I'd need to do part of it without telling you when. She paused. You want to test the operation without my knowledge. I want to test it the way an actual threat would encounter it. You knowing I'm there defeats the purpose. Another pause. Longer. He could see her working through the implications, the discomfort of being assessed without warning, the logic of why it was necessary overriding the instinct to maintain control of her own environment. Fine, she said. And if I find problems, he said, you let me address them my way, not by committee. Within reason. No, he said flatly, not within reason. If I identify a threat and you want a committee to vote on the response, someone can get hurt in the time that takes. I need latitude to act." She looked at him for a long moment. He didn't move, didn't qualify it, just let it sit. "All right," she said finally. He nodded. He turned toward the window and watched the city slide by for a few seconds, and then said the thing he'd been sitting with for the last few minutes. "The woman you trusted with your schedule," he said. "Your assistant and the board member. I need their names." "Why?" "Because if the information came from inside, it came from one of them or through one of them. I want to know who I'm working around before I know who I'm working for." Evelyn looked at him. Something shifted in her face. Not offense exactly, more like the recognition of a standard she hadn't expected to be held to. "My assistant is a woman named Cora Walsh," she said. "She's been with me for 7 years. I trust her." "Okay." "The board member is a man named Douglas Hale. He's been on the board for 11 years. He was a personal friend of my father's." "Okay," Jay said again. "You don't believe either of them is necessarily trustworthy just because I trust them," she said. It wasn't accusatory, just accurate. "I don't believe or disbelieve anything yet," he said. "I just want the names." She gave him a long, measured look. "You're not easy to read," she said. "I know," he said. "Is that intentional?" He thought about Lily asleep in her room with her rabbit, about the shot that had hit the table 2 feet from where he'd been positioned, about the 5 men on the floor of a coffee shop that smelled like burnt espresso and spilled milk. "Most things I do are intentional," he said. He called her that evening from his kitchen after Lily's bath, and the 3 books that were the nightly minimum and the extended negotiation over which stuffed animals were allowed in the bed, which Lily approached with the strategic tenacity of someone who knew she was going to win. "I'm in," he said when Evelyn picked up. A half-second pause. "I didn't expect you to decide this quickly." "I don't usually," he said. "But your situation is deteriorating faster than you may realize. The crew this morning wasn't a warning, it was an attempt, and the fact that it failed doesn't mean the operation behind it failed. It means they'll adapt and try again." "I know," she said. "And you should know," he continued, "that I'm doing this for reasons that are mine, not yours. I'm not doing it for the money." "Then why?" He looked across the small hallway toward Lily's room, where the faint sound of the white noise machine she slept with turned the silence into something soft and steady. "Because someone sent trained men into a building where my daughter was eating her breakfast," he said, "and I want to understand why. All the way down." A pause. "And because I believe if I don't stop this, the next attempt will happen somewhere else. Maybe somewhere she's there again." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had shifted slightly. "Is she okay? Lily?" "She's fine," he said. "She asked me this evening if the men who were resting at the cafe ever woke up." A pause. "What did you tell her?" "I told her probably yes." "And she was satisfied with that?" "She moved on to asking why clouds look like things," he said. "So yes." Something close to a laugh moved through the phone, briefly. It disappeared quickly, the way things did with her. "I'll have Cora set up your access for tomorrow," she said. "Not Cora," he said. "Not yet. I'll call you directly at this number at 9 a.m., and you can walk me in yourself." A pause. He could hear her understanding it. The compartmentalization already starting, the information about his movements not going through the assistant whose name was in the column of possible sources. "All right," she said. "One more thing," he said. "Yes?" "The man in the cafe. Heavy watch, expensive shirt. He made comments about me and my daughter before the crew arrived." A beat. "I saw that," she said carefully. "He's not relevant to your situation," Jay said, "but I want you to know that I noticed and that it doesn't affect what I'm doing here. I'm not operating out of wounded pride." "I didn't think you were," she said. "Good," he said. 9 a.m. He hung up and stood in his kitchen for a moment. Outside the window, the city had settled into its nighttime register. Lower, darker, the distant sound of something moving somewhere. He made himself a sandwich he didn't particularly want and ate half of it standing at the counter. 3 years. 3 years of farmers markets and library story time and grilled cheese lunches and the fire drill game that was a game and not a game. And he'd managed to build something in that time that resembled what he'd promised Maya he would build. A quiet life. A normal life. The kind of life where Lily grew up knowing her father and not knowing what her father had once been capable of. He washed his plate and dried his hands and looked at the cut on his forearm. The tape was holding. He was 32 years old and he was tired in a way that went deeper than sleep, and he had agreed to walk back into exactly the kind of situation he'd spent 3 years walking away from. He checked Lily's room one last time before bed. She was asleep on her back with the rabbit on her chest and 4 other stuffed animals arranged around the perimeter of the bed in a configuration that apparently made strategic sense to her. The white noise machine made its soft sound. The nightlight threw a faint orange circle on the ceiling. He stood there for longer than he meant to. He wasn't sure what Maya would have said about all of this. He used to think he knew. He'd spent a year and a half after she died having imaginary conversations with her, the way you do when someone is gone before you're done needing their opinion. But those conversations had gotten harder to run in his head lately. Her voice was still there, mostly, but the responses he'd generate for her had started feeling like what they were. Things he was telling himself. What he knew was that she would have wanted Lily safe. So would he. That was the whole thing, really. That was where it started and where it ended. Everything in the middle was just execution. He turned off the hall light and went to bed. He lay in the dark and did not sleep for a long time, and when he finally did, it was not restful, and in the morning he was up before 5 again, which was fine because he had a lot to think about. He called Evelyn at 9 on the dot, the way he'd said he would, because if he was going to ask her to trust him with her life, then the least he could do was be where he said he'd be when he said he'd be there. She picked up on the second ring and gave him the building address on Michigan Avenue without any preamble, which he appreciated. Sinclair Logistics occupied the top 4 floors of a 40-story glass tower that sat between a hotel and a law firm and looked exactly like what it was. The kind of building that cost a certain amount per square foot that Jace didn't think about, because thinking about it would make him aware of the distance between that world and his kitchen table where Lily ate cereal. The lobby had 2 security desks, a badge scanner, and 3 cameras he could see from the revolving door, and 2 more he clocked in the first 8 seconds of entering that weren't positioned where standard security logic would put them, which meant whoever had designed the system had either been lazy or had wanted blind spots. He filed that away. Evelyn met him herself at the elevator bank, which he'd told her to do, because the alternative was sending someone to meet him, and he wasn't ready for anyone else in this building to know he existed yet. She was in a dark blazer again, different from yesterday's, this one untorn, and she had the particular composed energy of someone who had slept badly but wasn't going to let it show. "You look tired," he said, because it was true, and because he wasn't going to manage her. "Good morning to you too," she said, pressing the elevator button. "It's an observation, not a criticism." She looked at him sideways. "I was on calls until 1 a.m. dealing with the fallout from yesterday. Board members, insurance, legal, 2 federal agents who apparently decided that a Friday night was an excellent time to ask questions." The elevator opened. They stepped in. "I'm fine." "Okay," he said. She glanced at him. He wasn't going to argue with fine. He'd learned a long time ago that arguing with fine was a waste of time that could better be spent watching what fine actually looked like in practice. The executive floor was the 38th, and it was what he expected. Open plan with glass walls, a conference room that could probably hold 30 people, individual offices along the perimeter, a receptionist named Bethany who smiled at Evelyn with the focused warmth of someone who understood that her employer was carrying something heavy and was trying not to add to it. 2 assistants at a shared desk near the elevator, one of whom was presumably Cora Walsh, though Jace didn't ask and Evelyn didn't introduce. "I want to walk the space," he said, keeping his voice low, "without anyone knowing who I am or why I'm here." "I'll tell them you're a consultant," she said. "What kind?" "The kind that doesn't explain himself," she said, and there was something almost dry in it that he'd learned in 2 days was as close to a joke as she usually got. He spent 2 hours walking the building. Not with her. She had a 9:30 with her CFO that she hadn't canceled, because canceling would raise questions, and the most dangerous thing she could do right now was signal that something had changed in her operational posture. He went alone, with a laminated visitor badge that said Facilities Review and a clipboard he'd asked Bethany for because a man with a clipboard was invisible in a corporate building, which was one of the more reliable things he'd learned in the years since leaving the military. What he found in those 2 hours was not good. The camera blind spots he'd clocked in the lobby were not an accident. They formed a consistent pattern across all 4 floors, which meant they were either a design flaw in the original system or they'd been introduced deliberately, and either way the result was the same. There were 7 distinct corridors in the building from which a person could move without appearing on any recorded feed. He walked all 7. He timed them. He noted which ones connected to which exits. The badge system logged entries but not exits, which was a gap so basic it should have been closed years ago. He tested it twice, entering and leaving the same restricted area, and the log showed his entry and nothing else. The server room on the 37th floor had a keypad entry and a camera, but the camera was angled to cover the keypad, not the interior, which meant you could see who entered the code but not what they did once they were inside. The loading dock on the building's north side, used for deliveries, catering, IT equipment, had a single guard who rotated a 20-minute patrol loop, leaving the dock itself unwatched for approximately 4 minutes in every cycle. He didn't write any of this down on the clipboard. He didn't need to. He remembered things the way he remembered everything, completely, spatially, with the specific detail of someone whose professional history had made forgetting costly. By 11:30, he was back on the 38th floor, and Evelyn was out of her CFO meeting and in her office with the glass door closed, and he knocked once and went in without waiting for her to answer, which made her look up sharply from her desk. "I'm going to need a private space to talk," he said. "Not your office." She absorbed the implication that her office might not be secure without visibly reacting. "Conference room B on 37. I had it swept last week." "By who?" "My head of IT security, a man named—" "By someone external to the company," he said. A pause. "No." "Then it wasn't swept," he said. "Not in any way I'd rely on." She looked at him for a long moment, then stood, picked up her phone, said 3 words to whoever was on the other end, and led him to a small room on 37 that wasn't Conference Room B, a former storage space that had been converted to an informal meeting room and contained a folding table, 4 mismatched chairs, and no visible technology except a wall outlet. She closed the door. "Better?" she said. "Better," he agreed. He sat down. She sat across from him. He told her what he'd found, in order, without editorializing. She listened the way she always listened, still and focused, the particular attention of someone who was used to receiving bad news and had learned not to shoot the messenger. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "The blind spots in the camera system," she said. "How long have they been there?" "I can't tell without pulling the original install records, but my read is that at least 3 of them are original design, and 2 were introduced later. The angle on the lobby northeast corner camera has been adjusted physically. You can see the mount marks." "Someone adjusted a camera in my lobby." "Yes." "Without anyone noticing?" "Facilities staff, maintenance crews, IT contractors, any of those could have done it on a routine visit. If someone knew the schedule and had 10 minutes, it would be straightforward." She stood up and walked to the window, which looked out at an air shaft, which gave her nothing to see but apparently something to do with herself. "This has been building for a long time," she said. It wasn't addressed to him specifically. She was thinking out loud in a way that told him she didn't usually do it with people around, and that the fact she was doing it now said something. 8 months is what you said," he replied. "That fits with what I'm seeing. This isn't improvised. The preparation is patient." She turned back. "What do you need?" "Access to your full vendor and contractor list for the last 18 months. All building access records. Personnel files for anyone with unrestricted building access. And I want to see the security protocols your team was using before the café. Specifically, who on your staff knew your Friday morning schedule." "That's a significant amount of internal information." "Yes," he said, "and I need it without routing the request through your normal administrative channels." She understood what he was asking. He could see it. He was asking her to get him sensitive operational data without going through the people who might have created the problem in the first place. Cora, she said. He waited. I know what you said, but Cora Walsh has been with me since this company was a third of its current size. She started as an intern. She took a 40% pay cut 3 different times because she believed in what we were building. She said it steadily, not defensively. I'm not saying she's above suspicion. I'm saying I need a reason that isn't proximity to my schedule before I treat her like a suspect. I understand, he said. I'm not asking you to treat her like a suspect. I'm asking you not to use her to route information about my investigation. Evelyn held his gaze. Fine, she said. I'll pull the access records myself from the HR portal. Tonight. Good. And Hale. Douglas Hale. What about him? I'd like to sit in on a meeting with him. Unannounced on my end. Introduce me as whatever you want. I don't care what the cover is. I want to watch him. You're going to read him, she said. I'm going to watch him, he repeated. I don't read people. I observe them. There's a difference. She looked at him for a second. You're very specific about language. Language is how people manage expectations, he said. I'd rather set accurate ones. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but adjacent to one. It disappeared quickly. Hale has a standing Thursday lunch with me. Every week, no exceptions. He's been doing it for 4 years. This Thursday? If I don't cancel it. Don't cancel it, he said. She nodded. She moved back to the folding table and sat down and looked at him with the expression of someone about to say something they'd been holding for a few minutes. There's something else, she said. He waited. The annual Sinclair Foundation Gala is in 18 days, she said. It's a charity event. We raise money for logistics infrastructure in underserved communities. It's been running for 6 years, 400 guests, international press, the full scope. He looked at her. You want to keep it? I need to keep it. Canceling would send a signal to investors, to partners, to the board, that the company is in crisis. Which it is, but I'm not ready for that to be the story. A crowd of 400 people in a fixed location is an operational nightmare from a protection standpoint, he said, especially with an unidentified internal threat. I know. If the people targeting you are watching, and they are, they'll see the gala as an opportunity. A known event, known location, fixed date, large crowd to use as cover. I know that too, she said, and you want to hold it anyway. Yes. He looked at her for a long moment. He thought about the 5 men in the café, professional, coordinated, patient. He thought about the camera in the lobby with the adjusted mount. He thought about the loading dock guard with the 4-minute gap in his rotation. Then we don't try to make it safe, he said. We make it a trap. She went still. Explain. If they're going to come, they're going to come whether we hold the gala or not. Canceling doesn't stop the threat. It just delays it and removes our ability to control the terrain. But if we hold it and we set the conditions, we choose the ground. He leaned forward slightly. We let them think they have the advantage. We let them think the event is exactly as vulnerable as it looks. And then it isn't. Evelyn was quiet for a long time, long enough that he started to think she was going to push back. Then she said, That requires letting them get close. Yes. Close enough that something could go wrong. Yes, he said. It requires accepting that risk, which is why I'm telling you now and not 2 days before the event. You need time to decide if that's a risk you're willing to accept. She looked at the folding table for a moment. At nothing, really, just the surface of it, the particular blankness of a person running numbers they couldn't see. I'll think about it, she said. Good, he said. That's the right answer for now. He left the building at 1 p.m. and picked Lily up from the in-home daycare 2 blocks from their apartment that she attended 3 days a week. A woman named Deb who ran it out of her first floor and had the demeanor of someone who had seen everything children were capable of and found it mostly delightful. Lily came out wearing a paper crown she'd made and carrying a painting that appeared to be a purple horse, though she described it as a dog. It's a dog? Jay said, studying it as they walked home. Her name is Princess, Lily said. Princess is a good name. Better than Mr. Ears, she said, with the pointed satisfaction of someone scoring a point in a long-running debate. He let her watch 30 minutes of cartoons after lunch while he sat at the kitchen table with his notebook, paper, never digital for this kind of thing, and laid out what he knew. He drew the building floor by floor from memory. He marked the camera blind spots. He noted the loading dock timing. He sketched a rough organizational chart of what he knew about Sinclair Logistics' internal structure, which at this point was not much, and identified the nodes he needed more information on. Cora Walsh, 7 years. Believed in the company, took pay cuts. Loyalty that old and that tested was hard to manufacture. Douglas Hale, 11 years on the board, personal friend of Evelyn's father. Old relationships were either the most trustworthy or the most dangerous. They gave people a sense of ownership over something that wasn't theirs anymore. He wrote both names and looked at them for a while and didn't draw any conclusions yet, because conclusions drawn before evidence were just prejudices with better posture. The call came at 3:17. Unknown number, which he didn't answer. It called again 4 minutes later. Same number. He let it go. 30 seconds after the second call, a text arrived from the same number. "This is Kowalski. Call me back, Holloway. It's about your friends from Friday." He called back. "You're fast," the detective said. "What do you have?" "What I have is a headache," Kowalski said, "because the 5 men you put on the floor of that cafe are not who their IDs say they are. The feds ran them, and 3 of the 5 come back to an organization that's been on a watch list for about 2 years. International private security contractor out of Eastern Europe. The kind that doesn't technically exist on paper, but operationally is very real." "Sentinel Group," Jay said. A pause. "You know them." "I know of them," he said. Which was true. Sentinel had come up in his last operational briefing before he left the service. A loose network of former military from 3 or 4 different countries operating as a private enforcement arm for whoever paid enough. Not terrorists. More dangerous than that in some ways. Professionals without a flag. "Then you know this isn't a local crew," Kowalski said. "I knew that Friday morning," Jay said. "Yeah, I figured." The detective's voice had something in it that wasn't quite respect but was close. The acknowledgement of someone recognizing a peer in a different lane. "The feds are taking over jurisdiction on the 5, which means I'm technically off the case. But I'm calling you anyway because the woman from the cafe, the CEO, she's in the middle of something that's bigger than a grab attempt, and I got the feeling you know more about it than you told me." "I'm looking into it," Jay said. "Looking into it," Kowalski repeated. "Is that what you're doing?" "Yes." A pause. "You want a word of advice from someone who's been in this city a long time?" "Sure," Jay said. "Sentinel-connected operations don't stop because the first attempt didn't work," Kowalski said. "They're structured to absorb a setback and continue. Whoever hired them didn't just hire 5 guys, they hired a framework." "I know," Jay said. "Good." A beat. "Your daughter okay?" The question landed differently than he expected it to. Coming from Kowalski, who'd watched Lily sit in the corner booth drawing on the back of a menu while 5 men were zip-tied on the floor around her, it wasn't small talk. "She's fine," Jay said, making paper crowns. "Good," the detective said again. "Watch your back, Holloway." He hung up and sat with that for a moment. Then he made a call of his own, a number he hadn't used in 8 months. A man named Tomas Rydell, who had done 4 tours with him and was now doing private intelligence work out of an address in Virginia that was technically his home office, but functioned as something considerably more sophisticated. "Jace," Tomas said, picking up immediately. He had the same voice as always, dry, even. The voice of someone who found most things mildly amusing and genuinely alarming things the most amusing of all. "I was wondering when you'd call." "You heard." "I heard a former SEAL took apart 5 Sentinel guys in a coffee shop. I didn't know it was you specifically until about an hour ago." A pause. "How's Lily?" "Making a paper crown. She needed a name for her rabbit." "What'd she go with?" "She's still deciding. She rejected Mr. Ears." "Smart kid." Tomas's voice shifted slightly. Less dry, more direct. "What do you need?" "I need everything you have on a company called Sinclair Logistics. Specifically, anyone in its orbit who might have a reason to want it dismantled. and I need it quietly. Nothing that roots back to the company or anyone associated with it. Timeline? Fast as you can. What am I looking for? I don't know yet. I'm looking for something that doesn't fit. He paused. And I need whatever you have on Sentinel's current operational activity in the continental U.S., who they've been contracted by in the last 6 months. That second one is harder, Tomas said. I know. Do what you can. You know this is going to cost me some chips I've been saving, Tomas said. I know, Jay said. I'll owe you. You already owe me from the thing in Tallinn. That wasn't my fault? The window was absolutely your fault. The window was structurally compromised before He stopped. Lily had appeared in the kitchen doorway, crown slightly askew, looking at him with the intent expression of a child who wanted something and was calculating approach angles. He held up one finger. She waited, barely. I'll call you when I have something, Tomas said. Appreciate it. He hung up. Lily came forward immediately. Daddy, can we go to the park? He looked at his notebook, at the floor plan he'd drawn from memory, at the names on the page. Yeah, he said. Get your coat. She ran to get her coat with the energy of someone who had been waiting for permission for the last 10 minutes, which she probably had been. Jace closed the notebook and put it under the kitchen drawer liner where he kept things he didn't want found, which was probably excessive, given that the only person with access to his apartment was a 4-year-old in Frank, but habits were habits. At the park, Lily went immediately to the climbing structure and began organizing the other children present into what appeared to be an expedition of some kind. He sat on the bench he always sat on, the one with the clear sight line to all 3 entry points and the path back to the street, and watched her and thought. The gala was 18 days out. He had 18 days to identify who inside Sinclair Logistics was feeding information to a Sentinel-connected operation, restructure the company's security from the ground up, without that person knowing it was being restructured, and build a containment plan for an event that would put 400 people in one place on a known date. 18 days. He'd done more with less time and less information. He'd also had a full team, an operational budget, and no 4-year-old daughter to consider. Lily reached the top of the climbing structure and raised both arms above her head in the gesture of someone who had conquered something significant and looked around to see if he was watching. He raised one hand from the bench. She grinned and started back down. He thought about what he'd told Evelyn, that they had to let the threat get close, that they had to accept the risk of it in order to control the outcome. He believed it operationally, it was sound logic, and he'd executed variations of it in worse conditions. But he was aware, in a way that he wouldn't have been 3 years ago, or maybe wouldn't have let himself be 3 years ago. That sound operational logic and acceptable risk were different things depending on where you were standing when you made the calculation. He was standing in a park in Wicker Park, watching his daughter command a group of 7 children through an imaginary expedition. The risk tolerance was different here. It had to be. That meant he had to be better than he'd ever been. Not faster, not harder. Better. More complete. More certain. With fewer variables left to chance. He pulled out his phone and started a message to Evelyn. No names, nothing specific. Just a request for her to have the access records ready by tomorrow morning and to set up the Thursday Hale lunch. He sent it and pocketed the phone. He had 17 days now. He'd spent one of the 18 sitting in a park. Some people would have called that a waste. He watched Lily reach the bottom of the slide and immediately start the negotiation for another turn, deploying the particular combination of social tactics that 4-year-olds used before they learned to feel self-conscious about wanting things. And he thought that some people had never sat in a park and watched their kid negotiate a turn on a slide and didn't know what they were missing, and that being here, right now, for this specific 20 minutes, was not a waste of anything. Then he stood up and called Lily's name. 5 more minutes? She tried. 2, he said. She held up 4 fingers. 3, he said, and she accepted this immediately, which meant she'd been aiming for 3 all along. He sat back down and let himself have the 3 minutes, and when they were up, he collected his daughter and her coat and her rabbit, which she'd apparently brought to the park without him noticing, and they walked home through the late afternoon cold with her hand in his, and she told him about the expedition. They'd been looking for treasure, she said, buried treasure, and she was pretty sure it was under the big rock by the fence, but Jalen said it was by the slide, and so they'd had to vote. Who won? Jace asked. Jalen, she said. But the treasure wasn't there either. So where is it? She looked up at him with perfect certainty. We haven't found it yet. That's why it's still buried. He looked down at her. She looked back up at him, and in her face he could see things that were his, and things that were Maya's, and things that were entirely hers and no one else's. And he felt that thing again, the one he couldn't name, that wasn't grief and wasn't love, but was made of both of them. Right, he said. That makes sense. She nodded like she'd always known he'd understand eventually, and pulled him forward, and the two of them walked home. He had work to do, a lot of it. People to watch, systems to test, a timeline bearing down on him with the particular indifference of time in any operational context. But right now he was walking home with his daughter, and the treasure was still buried, and that was enough for the length of one block. He made it last as long as he could. Thomas called back on Tuesday, which was faster than Jace had expected, and slow enough that he'd spent the intervening days doing the kind of groundwork that didn't require intelligence files. Walking the gala venue 3 times at different hours, mapping the perimeter, identifying the staff entry points, and the catering corridors, and the places where a person with bad intentions could stand and not be immediately visible to anyone who wasn't specifically looking. The venue was a converted industrial building in the West Loop called the Meridian Hall. Exposed brick, high ceilings, the kind of reclaimed aesthetic that cost more to maintain than new construction would have. Evelyn's foundation had been using it for 3 years, which meant anyone who'd been watching the gala for 3 years knew the floor plan as well as he did. Probably better. He didn't share that thought with Evelyn yet. He was still building the picture. Tomas's call came while Jace was sitting in his car outside the Meridian at 6:40 in the morning, drinking bad gas station coffee and watching a delivery crew unload equipment for an unrelated event later that week. Talk to me, Jace said. Sinclair Logistics is cleaner than most at that size, Tomas said. Financials are solid, no significant regulatory exposure, no major litigation beyond the usual freight disputes. The company itself is not the problem. But there's a minority stakeholder group that acquired a 14% position about 16 months ago through a series of shell purchases that took me a while to unpack. A pause. Tomas always paused before the thing that mattered. It was a habit Jace had spent years either appreciating or being frustrated by, depending on the context. The beneficial owner at the end of that chain is a private equity structure called Orion Capital Partners. Registered in Luxembourg, operational footprint in 3 countries. On paper, they're a standard acquisition fund. Off paper, Jace said. Off paper, 2 of their managing partners have documented financial relationships with a logistics competitor called Meridian Global Freight. Not the same as your venue. Just an unfortunate name collision. Meridian Global has been trying to expand into Sinclair's North American market for about 2 years and failing because Sinclair's contracts are too locked up. They can't compete on price or network, so they can't grow. Tomas's voice stayed even and informational. If Sinclair collapses, leadership crisis, security incident, investor panic, whatever the trigger, those contracts become renegotiable. Orion Capital is positioned to acquire the assets in a distressed sale at a fraction of market value, and Meridian Global gets the network access it's been unable to buy at fair price. Jace sat with that for a moment. Outside, one of the delivery men dropped something metal, and it rang off the sidewalk, and the sound traveled cleanly through the cold morning air. So it's not personal, he said. It's entirely financial, Tomas confirmed. They don't want Evelyn Sinclair dead. Dead creates legal complications, investigations, public attention. They want her destabilized, frightened into a bad decision, or removed from operational control through a board maneuver while the company is in crisis and she looks like she can't manage it. The cafe wasn't supposed to be a kill, Jace said, working it through. It was a pressure event, a demonstration. That's my read. Show her she's vulnerable. See how she responds. If she panics or retreats, the board has grounds to push for a leadership change. If she calls the police and goes public, the investor confidence damage might accomplish the same thing. They didn't account for the response they got, Jace said. No, Tomas agreed. They accounted for a CEO having a very bad Friday morning, not for a brief pause. Whatever you want to call what actually happened. And Sentinel? That's the more complicated part. Another pause, longer. Sentinel has done at least 2 documented operations for Orion-adjacent entities in the last 14 months. The connection isn't direct, there's a cutout layer, but the pattern is there if you know what to look for. Whoever Orion's people are using to coordinate, they've worked with Sentinel before, which means they know how Sentinel operates, and Sentinel knows their requirements. Which means the Café failure doesn't end the contract, Jace said. It just triggers the next phase. Yes, Tomas said. And Jace? The gala. I know. A fixed event, known date, 400 guesses cover. That's not a coincidence they'll let pass. I know, he said again. I'm counting on it. A beat. You're setting it up. I'm thinking about it. That's very different from the retired single father raising his kid in Wicker Park story I'd been telling myself about you, Tomas said. Go home and hug your wife, Jace said. She'd actually like that. A pause. I'll send you the full file through the secure channel, the Orion structure, the Sentinel timeline, everything I could pull. Another pause. The internal leak. I couldn't get there from my end. That piece is going to have to come from inside. Already working on it, Jace said. Jay spun. He hung up and drank the rest of his terrible coffee and looked at the Meridian Hall for another few minutes, seeing it differently now. Not just as a venue with security gaps, but as a board that someone had already been studying from the other side. He had 15 days. He spent the rest of that morning doing something he'd been postponing, which was having an honest conversation with himself about what he needed and didn't have. He needed people. Not a corporate security firm, not a licensed bodyguard service, not anything that could be found through a standard vendor search by someone who might be monitoring Evelyn's procurement activity. He needed people he'd worked with, people whose judgment he trusted in conditions where things went sideways fast and the plan stopped being useful. He had 2 numbers he could call. Both were people he'd sworn he'd only call in a genuine situation. He called them both. The first was a woman named Dana Reyes, former Army Ranger, then a decade in a federal task force, doing work that had overlapped with his own on 2 separate operations in 2 separate countries. She was living in Milwaukee now, running a personal training studio, and she picked up after 3 rings with the voice of someone who had just finished a class. Holloway, she said. How's the kid? She's good. She's negotiating animal names. What happened? He gave her the short version. When he finished, Dana was quiet for exactly 4 seconds, which he knew because he counted. When do you need me? She said. 12 days out from the event, maybe sooner. I need 2 weeks minimum lead time for preparation. I can be there in 3 days. I've got coverage for the studio. A pause. Pay. Evelyn Sinclair's budget. I haven't given her a number yet, but she won't push back. How do you know? Because she's smart enough to know what she needs, he said. And she's been around long enough to know what it costs. Okay, Dana said. Send me whatever you have. Through the secure channel. Obviously, she said, and the mild irritation in it was familiar and comfortable the way only long professional relationships could make it. Say hi to Lily. The second call was to a man named Marcus Webb, who'd been on his team for the last 18 months of his SEAL career and was now doing contract security work in the private sector, the kind that was legal and legitimate and paid well and bored him comprehensively. Marcus picked up immediately and said before Jace could speak, I already heard. You put down 5 Sentinel guys with a chair and your bare hands in a cafe and then went home to make grilled cheese. That's not exactly... The story's going around, Marcus said. Jace closed his eyes briefly. I need you in Chicago. When? Soon. I'll tell you more when you're here. I'm already packing, Marcus said. He wasn't entirely joking, which was either a good thing or a concerning one, and Jace had long since stopped deciding which. The Thursday lunch with Douglas Hale happened at a restaurant on the Magnificent Mile that Evelyn apparently went to every week, which was the kind of routine that made a security professional's left eye twitch. Same day, same place, same time, 12:30, a corner table that Hale apparently preferred because it was his usual and the maitre d' knew him by name. Jace arrived 40 minutes early and took a seat at the bar with a club soda and a view of the entire room. He was in a jacket that fit well enough that the slight bulk under his left arm wasn't visible. He hadn't needed it in a coffee shop on a Friday morning, but he wasn't making that mistake twice. Hale arrived first. 63, silver-haired, the build of someone who had been athletic younger and carried the memory of it in his posture. He wore a charcoal suit with the ease of someone who had been wearing suits since before suits were a choice rather than an expectation. He shook hands with two people on his way to the table, both of whom clearly recognized him. A man comfortable in rooms like this in the way that only comes from a lifetime of them. Evelyn arrived 4 minutes later. She didn't look at Jace when she came in. They'd agreed on that. He watched from the bar. The thing about watching a conversation you can't hear is that you learn things the audio would actually obscure. You notice the timing of reactions, whether someone responds before they've had time to process what was said, which means they already knew, or whether they show the micro-expression of genuine surprise, which is much harder to fake than people think. You notice where hands go. You notice eye contact, when it's held and when it's broken, and which direction it breaks. Douglas Hale was good. He was genuinely good. His body language across the first 20 minutes was everything you'd expect from a longtime board member having a weekly lunch with a CEO he mentored. Attentive, warm, periodic concern when the conversation appeared to turn serious. When Evelyn said something that was clearly weighted, Jace could tell from the shift in her posture. Hale's expression arranged itself into the appropriate gravity. He leaned forward. He nodded. He appeared to engage. And then his left hand, which had been resting on the table, moved to his lap. It was a small thing, negligible to most people. Hale probably didn't even know he did it. But Jace had spent a significant portion of his professional life in situations where reading people's bodies was the difference between a successful extraction and a room full of dead colleagues, and the movement of a hand to the lap under the table was almost always the same thing: self-regulation. The physical management of an emotion the face wasn't showing. He was controlling something. Jace put down his club soda. Hale wasn't panicking. He wasn't afraid. It was something subtler. The management of information. The steady interior calculation of a person sitting across from someone who might be getting close to something. After lunch, Evelyn sent a text that said simply, "Well?" He typed back, "Not yet, but watch what he does in the next 48 hours." She didn't reply, which meant she was thinking about it. He was in the lobby of the Michigan Avenue building the next morning when Cora Walsh arrived. He knew it was her because she was carrying 3 bags and a coffee carrier, and moving with the particular purposeful energy of someone who had been arriving first for years. She was maybe 35, with the kind of practical efficiency in her clothing and her movement that said she'd long ago decided that looking like she was trying hard was less useful than simply being competent. He introduced himself, consultant, working with Ms. Sinclair on some operational assessment, and watched her response. Cora Walsh looked at him with the open curiosity of someone who had nothing to hide and also processed new information quickly. She said, "The one from the cafe," not as a question. He didn't confirm or deny. "Miss Sinclair mentioned me." She said there might be a consultant coming through. She didn't say it was the person who... She stopped. "Sorry, I read the police report summary that legal sent around. You were there with your daughter." "Yes," he said. "How is she?" He looked at Cora Walsh, and she looked back at him, and the question was simple and genuine and not performing anything. "She's fine," he said. "She wants a frog backpack." Cora almost smiled. "We have a vendor who does corporate gifts. I'm fairly certain they have frog backpacks." She shifted the bags in her hands. "What do you need from me?" He'd been planning to keep Cora at arm's length through most of this, on the basis that proximity to information made anyone a risk regardless of loyalty. But standing in this lobby watching her manage 3 bags and a coffee carrier while already pivoting to how she could be useful, he made a small adjustment. "Nothing right now," he said. "But that might change." "Okay," she said, and moved to the elevator without making it strange, which told him she was used to operating around things she wasn't fully read into and didn't take it personally. He filed that away too. The file from Tomas arrived through the secure channel that afternoon, and Jay spent 3 hours going through it at his kitchen table while Lily was at Deb's. The Orion capital structure was as convoluted as Tomas had described, a chain of shell entities across 4 jurisdictions that would have been nearly impossible to untangle without access to financial intelligence databases that were not publicly available. Thomas had used chips he'd been saving. Jace was going to owe him for a long time. The Meridian Global Freight connection was there, exactly as Tomas had described. What the file added was a name, a specific managing partner at Orion Capital, a man named Victor Price, who had also served on the Meridian Global Advisory Board until 14 months ago, when he'd quietly stepped down in a way that tried to leave no paper trail and mostly succeeded. Victor Price had attended a Sinclair Logistics investor event 2 years ago. His badge was in the file. Physical events, even corporate ones, kept attendance records, and Tomas was very good at finding things people assumed had been forgotten. He'd been in the room, he'd seen the operation, he'd started buying in through shells 6 months later. Jace looked at the photograph that accompanied the file. A man in his mid-50s, the particular look of someone who had been wealthy long enough that it had become structural rather than notable. He read the background material. Price had no military history and no operational background. He was a financial architect, not a tactical one, which meant he wasn't the one running Sentinel. He was the one funding whoever was. There was a layer missing. Between Orion Capital and Sentinel, there was a coordinator, someone who understood both the financial objective and the operational execution, who could translate Price's business goal into contract parameters for a private military operator. Someone with a foot in both worlds. He stared at the organizational chart he'd been building. He stared at it for a long time. Then his phone rang. Evelyn. Hale called me, she said when he picked up. Her voice was careful. 2 hours after the lunch. He asked if I'd hired any new security personnel recently. Jace said nothing. He said he'd heard something at his club. Someone mentioned seeing an unfamiliar face in my building. She paused. His club is 12 blocks from here. No one from my company would have been there. The only person in my building who was unfamiliar was you. Someone told him, Jace said. Yes. But the only people who knew you were bringing in a consultant were you and... He stopped. Me and no one, she said. I didn't tell anyone. I walked you in myself the way you asked. He turned that over. Who was in the lobby when you met me? Bethany at reception, the 2 assistants at the shared desk, and a pause. He could hear her working backward. Building security ran your badge. They log visitor check-ins to a shared system. Who has access to that system? A longer pause this time. Department heads and board members as of a security upgrade 18 months ago. It was framed as a transparency measure, board oversight of building access. Jace looked at his organizational chart. 18 months ago. Orion Capital had begun its shell purchases 16 months ago. The building access upgrade, which put Hale in a position to monitor visitor logs, had happened 2 months before. The sequencing wasn't coincidental. Evelyn, he said. I know, she said, before he could continue. Her voice had changed, flattened into something that wasn't emotional because she was actively not letting it be. I know what you're going to say. I need you to keep this conversation between us, he said. No action, no change in how you treat him. Exactly the same. For how long? Until the gala, he said. We need him to believe he still has the advantage. If he knows we're on to him, he either runs or he accelerates, and neither of those is what we want. A silence that had weight to it. He let it sit. He was my father's friend, she said finally. Just that. Nothing else attached to it. I know, he said. He didn't add anything. There wasn't anything useful to add. All right, she said. How do we do this? I'm going to give him something to find, Jace said. A piece of information about the gala's security setup that sounds real and specific. We watch how it moves, where it goes, how fast, what Sentinel does with it. You're going to feed him false intelligence. Yes. And if he passes it along to whoever he's working with, then we know the channel, Jace said, and we control what goes through it. And the gala, she said. You still want to hold it. More than ever, he said. It's the only place where we control the terrain, and they don't know we control it. That window closes if we delay." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her breathing, which not distressed, just deliberate. The breathing of someone making a decision they'd been circling for days. "I want to be honest with you about something," she said. "Okay." "I'm scared," she said, plainly, without the careful management she normally applied to everything she said to him. "I don't mean about my safety. I mean," she paused, "I've been running this company for 9 years. I built most of it myself. The idea that someone has been inside it close enough to feed information to people trying to destroy it, that's—" She stopped. "I keep going back to who I've trusted, what I've said, in what rooms, to who." "That's a reasonable thing to be sitting with," he said. "Is it going to get better, knowing who it is? Does that help?" He thought about that honestly. "It helps operationally," he said. "Whether it helps the other thing, I don't know. That's not my area." A short, quiet exhale. "Fair answer," she said. "I'm going to need you to do something that's going to be uncomfortable," he said. "What?" "I need you to call Hale tomorrow and invite him to the gala planning meeting next week. Give him a specific role. Security liaison between the board and the event team. Make him feel like he's inside the process." She was quiet for a moment. "You want me to bring him closer?" "I want him to feel like he's in control of something he isn't," Jace said. "People make mistakes when they're confident. Careful people get careless when they think they've won. And you'll give him the false information at that meeting. Through channels he'll find on his own," Jace said. "Not from you. He can't see it coming from you or from me directly. It has to look like something he discovered." "How do you plant information that looks like it was discovered?" "You put it somewhere findable by someone who's specifically looking for it," he said, "and you make it believable enough that the instinct to use it overrides the instinct to question it." She absorbed this. "You've done this before." "Variations of it," he said. "Does it work?" He looked at his kitchen table, at the organizational chart, at Victor Pre's name in the corner, connected by a line he'd drawn in pen to a box labeled Coordinator, Unknown, and another line from there to Sentinel, and another line from Sentinel to the 5 men on the cafe floor. "When the target wants to believe the information," he said, "it almost always works." Dana arrived Thursday evening. She drove herself, which was very Dana, and she showed up with a duffel bag and the particular focused quiet of someone shifting into work mode in the way you shift gears. Not dramatically, just a change in register. He met her outside the building while Frank had Lily upstairs. "You look tired," she said, assessing him the way she assessed everything. "You're the second person to tell me that this week." "Then maybe sleep," she said, "after the gala." She looked at him for a long moment, then looked up at the building, then back at him. "Tell me everything," she said. He did. They stood on the sidewalk in the November cold for 40 minutes while he walked her through the full picture. Orion, Priest, Sentinel, Hale, the gala, the false intelligence plan, the venue's vulnerabilities. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things he valued most about working with her. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "How many on the night?" she said, meaning the gala. "How many people on his team?" "You, Marcus, and 2 more I'm vetting, plus the existing venue security who we'll have to work around rather than with, because they can't know the full operational picture." "Why not?" "Because Hale sits on the foundation board that runs the event," he said. "Anything the venue security team knows, there's a path to him." "So we're working blind inside their structure," she said. "We're working compartmentalized inside their structure," he corrected. "That's a diplomatic way to say the same thing." She picked up her duffel bag. "Okay, what do you need from me first?" "The venue," he said. "I need you to walk it and tell me what you see that I missed." "You want to know what you missed," she said, like she was confirming that the sun had risen. "I always miss something," he said. "I've learned to account for it." She looked at him again, and in the streetlight he could see the particular expression she got when she was about to say something that was real rather than professional. "You doing okay, Jace?" "Actually." He thought about Lily in the park, raising her hands above the climbing structure. He thought about Maya's voice getting harder to hear in his own head. He thought about 5 men on a cafe floor and a shot hitting a table 18 inches from where he'd been. "Getting there," he said. She nodded, accepting it. "Okay," she said. "Show me this venue." Marcus arrived the next day, which meant Jace had 2 days before the planning meeting where he intended to feed Hale the false information, and 11 days after that to the gala. 13 days. He'd briefed both Donna and Marcus fully by Saturday night. They sat in his apartment, Lily asleep in her room, the city doing its overnight thing outside the windows. And they went over the operation the way they always had, methodically, disagreeably, with the particular collective intelligence of people who had worked together long enough to argue productively. The loading dock is the primary entry point for Sentinel if they're going in hard, Marcus said. 4-minute blind spot in the guard rotation is too clean to be accidental. Someone's already told them about it. Or they've already walked the venue themselves, Dana said. Either way, it's the breach point, Marcus said. We need someone on the dock. We need to own the dock while making it look like the 4-minute gap still exists, Jace said. They need to think they're exploiting a vulnerability that we've actually eliminated. How? Dana said. We modify the guard rotation without changing the guard, Jace said. He keeps his same pattern. He just doesn't know that we're filling in the gap ourselves without him seeing us do it. He'll notice eventually, Marcus said. He doesn't need to not notice eventually, Jace said. He needs to not notice on one specific night. Marcus looked at the ceiling in the way he looked at things when he was running a simulation in his head. Okay, he said. What about the inside? If Sentinel is sophisticated enough to have a floor plan, they'll have role assignments, someone on the catering staff, someone in the tech crew for the AV setup. Already on it, Jace said. I'm going through the vendor lists for the event. Everyone who has physical access to the Meridian that night gets run against every database Tomas can pull. That's a lot of people, Dana said. 48, he said. I've got 12 done, working through the rest. She looked at him. When do you sleep? After the gala, he said again. She exchanged a look with Marcus that he was meant to see and didn't comment on. They worked for another 2 hours and called it at midnight. When they'd gone, Dana to the hotel 2 blocks away, Marcus to the one around the corner because they weren't staying in the same place. Jace sat alone at his kitchen table for a few minutes. He looked at his organizational chart, at all the lines connecting names to structures to events, the web of it growing outward from a Friday morning in a cafe where someone spilled a cup of coffee on a tired father in a worn-out shirt. He thought about Hale at the restaurant, his hand moving to his lap. He thought about Priest's photograph and the investor event badge and the shells within shells within shells. He thought about the coordinator, the missing layer, the name still in a box with a question mark, because that piece wasn't resolved yet, and unresolved pieces had a habit of becoming the thing that mattered most at the worst possible moment. He picked up his pen and looked at the box. Whoever sat in the middle of this, between Priest's money and Sentinel's execution, understood both worlds, spoke both languages, had the kind of credibility with a private military operator that money alone didn't buy. Someone with history. He sat with that for a long time. Then he got up, checked on Lily, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. He still didn't sleep much. The planning meeting happened on a Tuesday in Conference Room A on the 38th floor, and Jace sat in the back corner with a legal pad and said almost nothing for the first 40 minutes. There were 7 people around the table, Evelyn at the head. Her events director, a meticulous woman named Sandra Park, who had been running the Sinclair Foundation Gala for 4 consecutive years and who treated logistical details with the focused intensity of someone diffusing something, 2 foundation staff members, a representative from the Meridian Hall, and Douglas Hale, who had accepted Evelyn's invitation to serve as board liaison with the particular gracious warmth of a man who had no idea what the invitation actually was. Jace had been introduced as a security consultant brought in post-cafe incident to review event protocols. Hale had shaken his hand with a firm grip and a measured smile and said, "Good to have you on board," in the tone of someone who meant the exact opposite. The meeting covered catering logistics, guest check-in flow, the AV setup timeline, the Foundation's keynote presentation, standard event architecture. Jace listened and occasionally wrote something on his legal pad, mostly structural notes that were real because he didn't see any value in faking attentiveness when actual attentiveness cost him nothing. 43 minutes in, Sandra moved to the security section of the agenda. This was the moment. Jace had prepared for it with Evelyn over 2 evenings. What to say, how to say it, what to leave visible in the margin of the document that Sandra would be referencing, in a font size that was readable from across a table to someone who was specifically looking for it. Sandra mentioned the loading dock protocols. She mentioned the venue's existing guard rotation. And then she said, with the confidence of someone reading from a briefing she'd been given, "We're also stationing a secondary team on the north corridor from 9 p.m. onward, which covers the primary blind spot in the venue's existing camera layout." This was false. There would be no secondary team on the north corridor. The north corridor was, in fact, going to be handled differently, but not in any way that would appear in any document Hale could access. Jace watched Hale the way he'd watched him at the restaurant, the same careful, peripheral attention. Hale's expression didn't change. His hand stayed on the table. He nodded along with the rest of the room in the measured way of someone absorbing information they already found satisfactory. But his pen moved. The tiniest motion, not writing, just the slight pressure of a thumb on the cap of a pen being clicked once, almost silently. A tell so small that only someone specifically watching for tells would have caught it. Jace wrote something on his legal pad. Not about Hale. He wrote, "North Corridor, confirmed." After the meeting, Hale lingered, as Jace had predicted he would, to make small talk with Evelyn near the credenza where the coffee and pastries were. Jace moved past them to the door, and as he did, he left his legal pad on the credenza beside the coffee service. On the top page, visible, were notes about the gala security setup, real ones and fabricated ones, interleaved in a way that would read as authentic shorthand from a working security consultant. The camera grid, entry protocols, team positions, all of it calibrated. The real information was real enough to look like the whole picture. The false information was specific enough to be actionable. He walked out and stood by the elevator and waited. Hale left the conference room 4 minutes later. He walked past the credenza on his way to the elevator. Jace was already gone, or appeared to be because he'd taken the stairs 2 floors up and was watching through the glass inset of the stairwell door. Hale stopped at the credenza, poured himself a coffee he hadn't wanted 30 minutes ago. And while he was doing it, his eyes went to the legal pad. They were there for about 6 seconds, not long, but enough for a practiced reader with a specific objective. He left without touching it. He didn't need to. 6 seconds was sufficient for a man who'd been reading corporate documents his whole life. Jace sent a text to Tomas from the stairwell. "Channel is active. Watch for outbound communication from DH in the next 6 hours. Tomas's reply came back in 40 seconds. On it. He was in his car by noon. He drove 3 blocks, parked, and sat there for a few minutes doing nothing in particular except letting the morning settle. He'd been running on coffee and 4-hour sleep cycles for 9 days, and he could feel it in the specific way that tired accumulated in his body sus. Not in his eyes or his head, the way people described fatigue, but in the long muscles of his back, the way they held everything slightly tighter than they needed to, the physical cost of sustained vigilance. He called Dana. "The meeting went the way we planned," he said. "Hale bit?" He read it. 6 seconds on the pad. 6 seconds is enough? For what we put in there, yes. He looked out the windshield at the street. A woman was walking a greyhound that appeared deeply opposed to the pace she was setting. "How's the venue?" "I went back this morning at 6, Dana said. "Early delivery crew comes through the loading dock at 6:40. 2 guys, same faces as last week, which means it's a regular contract. The guard's rotation is exactly what you said. 4-minute gap, consistent. I timed it 4 times. We're filling the gap ourselves? Marcus and I worked it out. We can cover it with 1 person if they're positioned correctly. I'll take it. Marcus is better for the interior." "Agreed," he said. "Jace," her voice shifted slightly. "I found the thing you missed." He'd asked her to. He'd expected it. But hearing it still did something specific to his chest that wasn't quite discomfort. More like the recognition of his own limits, which he'd gotten better at receiving over the years, but had never fully made peace with. "Tell me," he said. "The mezzanine level," she said. "There's a service access point at the east end. Looks like a utility closet, but it connects to a walkway above the main hall that was used when the building was industrial. It's not on the current floor plan. I only found it because I asked the venue manager about the original building layout, and she mentioned it offhand. A pause. From that walkway, you have a direct sightline to the main stage and the entire floor. He sat with that for a moment. A position above the crowd, connected by a route that didn't appear on the operational floor plan. It was exactly the kind of detail a Sentinel advance team would have found during a venue assessment and not mentioned in any communication that could be intercepted. "They know about it," he said. "Almost certainly," she said. "It's too good not to." "Okay," he said. "That's where they put the shooter." "That's where I'd put him," she said. "Elevated, concealed, non-standard access. It's the cleanest position in the building." "And we own it before they get there," he said. "That's what I was thinking." "Marcus takes the mezzanine," he said. "You have the dock. I stay mobile on the floor." "Who covers Evelyn?" "She has 2 of the existing venue security staff assigned to her for the event. I'm not changing that. Hale might notice if her protection suddenly upgraded. She stays in the same visible security posture." He paused. "I'll be close, but I can't be attached to her, or I lose the ability to respond to problems elsewhere." "She know that?" "We talked about it," he said. "Does she accept it?" He thought about the conversation he'd had with Evelyn 2 nights ago, in her office after everyone else had left, where she'd asked him directly what happened if something went wrong, and his answer, while honest, had not been the kind of answer that was reassuring to receive. "She accepts it," he said. "She doesn't like it." "Smart woman," Dinah said. Thomas called at 4:17 that afternoon. "He made contact 40 minutes after the meeting," Thomas said, without any opening. He'd been in this long enough that pleasantries during an active operation were something that happened to other people. Encrypted messaging app, which is cute, but not as cute as whoever built it thought it was. The message went to a routing number that bounces twice before it lands. I followed it. And? It lands at a device registered to a logistics consulting firm in Indianapolis called Bridgepoint Advisory Services. A pause. Bridgepoint has 2 principals. One is a retired freight executive who has nothing to do with any of this. The other is a man named Cole Raines. The name landed, and Jace sat very still. "Jace," Tomas said. "I know that name," Jace said. "I figured you might," Tomas said carefully. Cole Raines. He'd known the name for 6 years, though known was the wrong word. Known of, known around, known in the oblique and incomplete way that you knew people who operated in adjacent darkness. Raines had been Army Special Forces 2 decades in, finished his service as a lieutenant colonel. After that, private contracting, the legitimate kind at first, security consulting for multinationals, the work that former operators did when they needed to translate their skills into something that paid in dollars rather than deployment orders. And then, somewhere in the last 4 or 5 years, something had changed. Jace didn't know the full story. He'd heard fragments from Tomas once, a year ago, when Tomas mentioned the name in the context of something else entirely. An operation in Southeast Asia. A contract that had stepped significantly outside the boundaries of legitimate private security. A man who still spoke the language of military professionalism, but had shifted the purpose it served. The coordinator. The missing layer. The person who could talk to priests in financial terms, and to Sentinel in operational ones, because he understood both and was trusted by neither side to be anything except useful. "He's been in Chicago," Tomas said. "Bridgepoint has a project here. He's been here for 6 weeks." 6 weeks. Which covered the cafe. "He ran the cafe operation," Jace said. It wasn't a question. "That's my read," Tomas said. "He would have assessed the target, handled the Sentinel contract, managed the execution. The cafe wasn't supposed to go the way it went." "No," Jace said. "It was supposed to be a clean grab or a clean scare, and then I was there." "And now he knows you're there," Tomas said. "He would have gotten information back from the Sentinel team before the police took them. He knows who stopped the cafe op." Jace looked out the window of his car. The Greyhound and its owner were gone. The street was doing its ordinary afternoon thing, indifferent to the conversation happening inside a parked sedan. "He's going to be at the gala," Jace said. "I would be," Tomas said. He's going to want to see it run. He ran the cafe remotely and it failed. A man like Rains with his background, he's not going to let the same thing happen twice without being present. Which means you're going to be in the same building as someone who knows your capabilities and has 9 days to prepare for you specifically, Tomas said. Yes, Jace said. A pause. How are you feeling about that? Fine, Jace said. That's the most concerning answer you could have given me, Tomas said. The 9 days moved the way those kinds of days always moved. Too fast in the aggregate and too slow in the individual hours. He ran the venue 3 more times. He finalized team positions with Dana and Marcus and brought in 2 additional people Tomas vouched for. A former Marine named Carla Voss, who had the particular stillness of someone who had stopped needing to prove herself years ago, and a man named Derek Singh, who'd spent 4 years doing close protection for diplomatic staff in 3 different conflict zones, and who could blend into a formal event crowd in a way that most tactical people couldn't. 5 people, including himself. Against an unknown number of Sentinel operators, a coordinator with Special Forces training, and an event full of 400 civilians who had no idea what the evening actually was. He didn't love the math. He did it anyway. He told Evelyn about Rains on a Wednesday evening, sitting in the storage room on the 37th floor that had become their default meeting space. He told her plainly, the way he told her everything, all of it, without softening the parts that needed softening. She listened. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. He was at the investor event 2 years ago, she said. Jace looked at her. I remember him now, she said. Tall, very composed, asked specific questions about our freight routing infrastructure during the Q&A. I thought he was a logistics analyst. She looked at the folding table. He was mapping the operation. Yes, Jace said. She was quiet again, longer this time. He let her have it. I want to ask you something, she said, finally. Okay. This man, Rains, he has your background. He knows what you can do because he can do versions of it. She met his eyes. Does that change anything? For you? Not operationally, for you. He thought about it honestly because she was asking honestly and she deserved that. It changes the probability distribution of how the night goes, he said. It doesn't change what the night needs to accomplish. That's not what I asked, she said. He looked at her. She looked back. No, he said. It doesn't change anything for me. She held his gaze for a moment, reading something in his face that he wasn't fully aware he was showing, and then she nodded and looked away, accepting it. Okay, she said. The night of the gala arrived the way significant nights always did, quietly, ordinarily, without announcing itself. It was a Thursday. Lily went to Deb's for a sleepover, which she treated as an adventure rather than an absence of her father, which was either a good sign about her security or a good sign about Deb's snack situation. Jace dropped her off at 6, stood in Deb's doorway while Lily had already fully moved on to whatever Deb had planned, and drove to the Meridian. He was inside the building by 7. The event started at 8. The venue was already busy with the last hour of setup. Caterers, AV crew, foundation staff with clipboards moving at the particular pre-event pace that always looked like controlled chaos, but was usually exactly as controlled as it appeared. He walked the floor once. Everything was where it was supposed to be. He checked the loading dock. Dana gave him a single nod from her position, which was not visible to anyone who wasn't looking for her, which was the point. He checked the mezzanine. Marcus was already in position in the walkway above, his presence undetectable from the main floor, which was exactly what the position required, and exactly why Rains would have chosen it for a shooter. Carla Voss was on the event floor in a dark dress that cost less than the cheapest outfit in the room and looked exactly right. Derek Singh was at the check-in desk, working alongside the venue's own staff as a last-minute addition that Sandra Park had approved without questioning. Jace put on his jacket, dark, correct for the event, cut to work around what he was carrying, and stood in the corner of the main hall and watched people arrive. Evelyn came in at 8:15, which was 15 minutes after the event opened, but before anyone important would notice the gap. She wore something dark blue and moved through the room with the particular composed authority of a person on their own ground, greeting people, working the room the way people at her level learned to work rooms, which looked effortless and wasn't. Hale arrived at 8:22. He was with two other board members and their spouses, which was normal. He moved to Evelyn with a warmth that made Jace's jaw tighten. He monitored his jaw and moved on. The first hour passed without incident, which was either good or the thing before the thing. At 9:17, Derek Singh's voice came through the discreet earpiece Jace was wearing. Loading dock, movement. "Dana," Jace said quietly. "I see them." Dana's voice was even. 2, maybe 3, coming through the north approach. "Hold," Jace said. He moved through the crowd toward the service corridor that connected the main hall to the back of the building, keeping his pace normal, not urgent. People moved around him. A waiter offered him a glass of wine. He declined without breaking stride. 4, Dana said. 4th came from the east side. They split. "The split is the problem," Marcus said from above. "If one of them goes for the mezzanine access—" "Is anyone at the utility closet?" Jace said. A 2-second pause. "Not yet," Marcus said. "But hold your position," Jace said. "Do not let anyone know that access point exists until they find it themselves." He reached the service corridor. It was empty, lit by utility fluorescents, the particular backstage feeling of any large event, crates, folded tables, the machinery of a party that the party itself never saw. He moved to the junction where the corridor branched, one direction toward the dock and one toward the north stairwell that led to the mezzanine level. He waited. He heard them before he saw them, not because they were loud, because they weren't, but because he had been listening for exactly this and exactly this way for enough of his life that the sound of trained people moving carefully through a space they'd studied had a specific texture to it. 2 came into the corridor from the dock direction, tactical clothing under civilian outer layers. They were good, movement clean, communication minimal, the particular economy of professionals who'd rehearsed this. They saw him at the same moment he was already moving. The next 90 seconds were not a fight in the way that word usually implied. A fight had negotiation in it, back and forth, 2 parties adjusting. What Jace did in that corridor was closer to a conclusion. He'd spent 9 days preparing for this building, this layout, this specific junction, and the 2 men who came around the corner had spent those same 9 days preparing for a security posture that didn't exist. One of them was down before the second one fully registered what was happening. The second one was better, got a hand on Jace's arm, got his leverage adjusted, created a real problem for about 4 seconds before Jace resolved it in a way that involved the corridor wall and a controlled impact that would leave the man with a significant headache and zip ties he'd found on neither of them because he'd brought his own this time. "Dock is clear," Dana said in his ear. 2 down out here. Non-lethal. "Same in the corridor," Jace said. He was already moving toward the mezzanine stairwell. "Jace?" Marcus's voice changed register. "Someone is in the walkway. He came up from the east end. There's a second access point I didn't know about." He stopped. "Say again." "East end of the mezzanine. There's another access I didn't find. He's already up here." A pause that lasted less than a second but felt longer. "It's not a sentinel guy. He's not in tactical. He's watching the floor." He's watching the floor. Watching to see how the operation ran. Positioned to observe and direct, not to shoot. Rains. Jace took the stairs. The mezzanine walkway was exactly what Dana had described. Industrial, narrow, running above the main hall with a view of the entire floor below. The event sounds rose up from below in a muffled way. The clinking of glasses and the murmur of 400 people unaware that the building they were standing in had just had a small, contained, brutal conversation in its service corridors. Marcus was at the west end of the walkway. 40 feet east, a man stood at the railing with a phone in his hand. Tall, composed, silver at the temples. The posture of someone who had once commanded rooms of men who were trained to kill and had never fully stopped standing that way. Cole Raines turned when he heard Jace's footstep. Not in surprise. Men like Raines didn't startle, but in the way of someone who had been waiting for this specific moment and had simply been unclear on when it would arrive. "Holloway," he said. His voice was even, almost pleasant. "Raines," Jace said. They stood looking at each other across 40 feet of industrial walkway above a charity gala, and the distance between them had nothing to do with space. "Your people are down," Jace said, "both at the dock and in the corridor. The ones you had for the interior never got past the check-in desk. My person made them at the door, which means they're currently having a conversation with someone who used to work Federal Task Force." Rains processed this without showing what he felt about it. "You knew about the East Access," he said. "Dana found it." A pause. "I thought she retired." "People say that about me too," Jace said. Rains looked at him for a long moment. Below them, the event continued. Evelyn's voice, faint but audible, at the podium beginning the Foundation's keynote, the sound of 400 people settling into attention. "You're not going to call this in before you talk to me," Rains said. "No," Jace said. "Why not?" "Because I want to understand the piece I don't have yet," Jace said. "Priest, Orion, Meridian Global, Hale. I have all of that. I have the financial architecture and the operational contract and the internal source. What I don't have is why you. You had a career. You had a record." Rains was quiet for a moment. Below, Evelyn spoke about the Foundation's work, freight infrastructure in communities that commercial logistics had written off, supply chains that served people instead of just margins. Her voice carried the conviction of someone who had built something they believed in, and the sound of it rose up through the floor of the walkway like something physical. "Money is part of it," Rains said. He said it without apparent shame, the way people stated things they'd made their peace with. "But you're not going to believe it's only that." "No," Jace said. "I'm not." "The private sector has its own logic," Rains said. "You've been in it long enough to know. You work for whoever has the contract. You stop asking what the contract is for." "I haven't stopped asking," Jace said. "I know," Rains said, and there was something in it that wasn't admiration and wasn't contempt, something more like recognition. The acknowledgement of a fork in a road that they'd both stood at and gone different directions on. Jace looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "I need you to call Priest." Rains blinked, once, the first break in his composure. "Excuse me? I need you to call Victor Priest and tell him the operation is over, all of it. Sentinel, Orion's position in Sinclair, the board pressure, the financial architecture. I need Priest to understand that what he built is being unwound, and that the alternative to unwinding it quietly is considerably worse." Rains stared at him. "You want me to burn my own client?" "I want you to make a phone call," Jace said. "What you call it is your business." "And if I don't?" "Then what happens next is messier for everyone," Jace said, "including you. Tomas has the full financial chain documented. Federal financial crimes investigators are going to find Orion eventually with or without us. The question is whether Priest goes down in a way that takes you with him, or whether you're the person who provided material cooperation." A long silence. Below, Evelyn finished her keynote to applause that came up through the floor in a wave, and Jace stood in the walkway above a room full of people and looked at a man who had been something similar to him once and had become something else, and thought about forks in roads and the ways that decisions accumulated into people. Rains took out his phone. He looked at it. He looked at Jace. "You know, this doesn't end it cleanly," Rains said. "Priest has people. Even after a call like this, there are loose ends." "I know," Jace said. "That's why you're going to stay in Chicago for the next 2 weeks, and help me tie them off." Rains's expression shifted. Something almost dry moved across it. "You want me to work for you?" "I want you to do the right thing for reasons that might be self-interested," Jace said. "I don't need them to be noble. I just need them to be sufficient." Rains looked at him for a long moment. Then he made the call. What happened in the next 48 hours wasn't clean because none of the things that actually matter are ever clean. Rains's call to Price detonated what remained of Orion Capital's operational structure in the way that unexpected defections always do. Not with a bang, but with the specific sound of people scrambling to distance themselves from each other before the tide came in. Tomas, who had been ready since the moment Jace told him the call was happening, fed the financial documentation to 2 separate federal agencies simultaneously, which created the kind of jurisdictional pressure that made it very difficult for anyone to quietly bury anything. Douglas Hale resigned from the Sinclair board on a Friday morning, citing personal reasons, in a letter that had been written by his lawyer and said nothing true in any of its 4 paragraphs. 2 federal agents were waiting for him when he left the building. That was not Jace's doing directly. It was the result of the call logs that Tomas had provided, and the testimony of Raines, who had agreed to cooperate in exchange for arrangements that were above Jace's pay grade and frankly above his interest level. Hale didn't look well in the photographs that surfaced later. He looked like a man who had spent 11 years becoming comfortable in a room and had just been shown the door. Jace didn't feel good about it or bad about it. He felt mostly tired. Evelyn called him when it was done, when the federal piece had moved far enough that the acute operational phase was clearly over. And she said, "It's finished." And he said, "Most of it." Because finished was a strong word for something that would have legal and financial tail for months. And she said, "Most of it then." And they both sat with that for a moment before she said, "Thank you," in the voice of someone for whom those 2 words were genuinely insufficient and who knew it. "You don't have to," he started. "I know I don't have to," she said. "I'm saying it anyway." He let her. He got Lily on Saturday morning. She came out of Deb's with a drawing she'd made at what she described as night art time, which was a period Deb apparently offered after the regular day. The drawing was of a house with people in front of it and a large animal beside it that might have been a horse or might have been a frog. Jace honestly could not tell. "Who are the people?" he asked as they walked home. "That's us," Lily said, pointing to 2 figures of significantly different heights. "And that's Frank, and that's the rabbit lady." "The rabbit lady," he said. "The lady from Daddy's work," she said. "She has the same hair as a rabbit." He thought about this. "Did you meet someone from my work?" "She came to get you one time," Lily said, with the certainty of someone reporting established fact. "When you forgot your phone at home, she had rabbit hair." Dana. Dana had come to the apartment once, briefly, when he'd left his secure phone on the kitchen counter during a time he couldn't afford to be without it. She'd been inside for approximately 90 seconds. Lily apparently cataloged everyone. "She's a good person," he said. "I know," Lily said. "She gave me a sticker." They walked home. It was cold, the kind of November cold that had committed to itself, and Lily held his hand and told him about Deb's sleepover, which had involved popcorn and a movie about animals, and a disagreement between 2 of the other kids about whether hedgehogs could swim, which Lily had resolved by suggesting they ask a hedgehog. "Did you find one?" Jace asked. "No," she said. "But we looked." He squeezed her hand. She squeezed back without looking up, still talking, already moving to the next part of the story. He thought about what Raines had said in the walkway. The private sector has its own logic. You stop asking what the contract is for. He thought about what he'd said back. "I haven't stopped asking." He still believed that. He thought it was true of him. But he'd spent enough time in the company of men who had believed the same thing about themselves, right up until they didn't, to know that belief wasn't armor. It was just a position you had to keep choosing over and over in circumstances that didn't always make the choice easy. He'd made it again on a Thursday night in a charity event above a city that didn't know any of it had happened. He'd make it again next time. The week after the gala, Evelyn offered him a formal arrangement, a position with a title and a contract and a compensation package that was so far removed from what he'd been making doing occasional consulting that he sat with it in his car for 20 minutes before calling her back. "I don't want a title like," he said. "What do you want?" "I want the arrangement we discussed. Flexibility around Lily's schedule. No permanent office in the building. I work the problems you actually have, not the ones that look good on an org chart." A pause. "That's not how we typically structure." "I know," he said. "But I'm not a typical structure kind of person." Another pause. He could hear her almost smiling, or the closest thing to it. "All right," she said. "We'll do it your way." "And Cora," he said. "What about her?" "She's clean," he said. "I should have told you sooner. I know I made you uncertain about her." A silence. "Thank you for telling me. She's been protecting your operation in ways you probably don't fully know," he said. She noticed Hale's behavior twice in the last 2 months and flagged it internally in ways that got dismissed. You should read her notes from the board liaison files. A longer silence. "I will," Evelyn said. He ended the call and drove to pick up Lily from Deb's, because it was a Tuesday, and on Tuesdays she had a music class at 3:15, and he was not going to be late for it, because he had been late for it once in October, and she had not forgotten and had referenced it twice in unrelated conversations since. He made it with 6 minutes to spare. He sat in the small waiting area outside the music class with 4 other parents he'd been sitting with for months. A woman named Priya's mom, who brought really good granola bars and had strong opinions about the city's recycling program. A man named Ty, whose son Jalen was apparently Lily's primary competition for social influence in the group, and 2 others whose names Jace had learned and then lost and felt badly about, but not badly enough to ask again. They talked about the usual things: school schedules, a restaurant that had opened nearby, whether the music teacher was as good this year as last year, which Jace had no basis for evaluating but listened to anyway. He sat in a plastic chair and listened to the muffled sound of small children learning where the notes went, and the particular complicated weight he'd been carrying for 3 weeks had shifted slightly. Not gone. It didn't go anywhere. Things like that didn't simply leave, but redistributed. Bearable. The class ended. Lily came out with a shaker made from a plastic bottle and dried beans, which she demonstrated for him at high volume and with great commitment in the hallway. "Very good," he said. "I made it myself," she said. "Miss Tricia let me put in the beans." "How many beans?" She held up both hands, fingers spread, then added 3 more fingers from one hand. "That many," she said. 13 beans, he said. "Yes," she said, with the satisfaction of someone who had gotten the quantity exactly right through careful deliberation. They walked home. She shook her bean instrument the whole way and narrated a story about the beans that became increasingly elaborate with each block. They were a band, apparently, and they had a tour bus, and the tour bus was the bottle, and they were going somewhere warm because they were cold, which Lily said with an authority that suggested she had given the beans' preferences considerable thought. He listened to all of it. He'd told Evelyn, in the storage room on the 37th floor, that the reason he'd come back to this kind of work was because someone had sent trained men into a building where his daughter was having breakfast, and he wanted to understand all the way down, and he wanted to make sure it couldn't happen again. All of that was true. But standing in it now, with the thing resolved and the operational weight settling, he knew there was another thing that was also true, smaller and harder to say out loud. He was good at this. He was better at it than most people he'd ever met. And being good at something that cost you as much as this cost him was not something you simply set aside because you decided on a different life. It was something you found a way to carry without letting it crush the other thing. The thing that was, in the end, the only reason any of it meant anything. He looked at his daughter. She was telling him about the lead bean now, the one who played the shaker from the inside, which she acknowledged was philosophically complicated, but maintained was possible. "Maybe," he said. "Definitely," she said. He smiled, full, real, not caught before it formed. She didn't see it because she was looking at her bean shaker, narrating the tour bus route, which was fine. It wasn't for her to see. It was just a thing that happened. A father, smiling on a sidewalk in November, a small, complicated, merciful thing happening in the middle of an ordinary block in a city that didn't know his name. He had an 11-year-old cut on his forearm that had healed crooked. He slept badly most nights, and probably always would. He forgot things sometimes, the kind of normal things that normal people remembered, grocery lists and billing dates and names of parents at music class, in a brain that had been trained for a different kind of remembering and hadn't entirely renegotiated. He wasn't the version of himself that Maya would have hoped he'd become exactly. He wasn't entirely sure what version that was. But he was here, on this sidewalk, present and paying attention, which was more than some people managed and less than he sometimes wished he could be. And it was enough. The beans were going to Miami. He'd asked. And for the rest of the block, until home came into view, he listened to every detail of the journey.